Good afternoon, YouTube. Welcome back to Civic Minded. Today we are going to be doing the third video in the automatic window conversion series, and that is the actual wiring and calibration of the new window switches. We are going to be creating splices like this in the existing wiring. We're going to be hooking up all the wiring necessary for the new switches, and we're going to be hooking up the new wiring that we ran in video number 2 for the window motor pulsars. We're also going to be replacing all 4 switches, and I'll show you what is required for that. The fronts are easy. This is the same form factor as the factory front switches or the Civic front switches. The backs, well, there are a couple different things we could do for the back. Some involve 3D printing. We'll get into that later in the video. But once you have this done, you will have automatic up and down on all 4 windows of your 9th Gen Civic. Now, you're going to have a couple of side effects arising from this. Firstly, the lock-unlock function will no longer work. And second, you may notice when I pan the camera over here and close the driver's door, it didn't do it. I don't know why. Yeah, you heard the unlock motion just fired. I don't know why that happens, but it does. So in a bonus video after this, we're going to be creating a custom circuit that will restore the lock-unlock function and hopefully make it so the system does not do that. Just a fair warning, most of this video is going to be dubbed because when I was filming it, the narration, it's hard to film something you've never done before and make narration. So I'm going to give you a basic overview of how to splice these wiring connections, how to crimp and strip wires, and it's super easy. And then I think most of the video is going to go over what wires need to go where. Now, you don't have to splice using a third-party connector like this. You can just use butt connectors, you can solder, you can crimp. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can wrap the wires together and electrical tape them. Don't do that, actually. I wouldn't recommend that, but this splice here makes it easy just in case we need to put the stock switches back for any reason. It's just a simple plug and play. If you have the time and resources to measure them out, you could certainly create a 3D print cast of the factory Civic acceptors here and then just plug your factory window wiring into that and then have that come out into your new window wiring. I was going to do that, but I was kind of running short on time. I wanted this mod done by the summer, so yeah. Alright, without further ado, let's get to it. So you saw a general map of the wiring per switch in part 1. Here's that map again. And here's a larger map showing what's going to be happening in each door. The good news is we only need to do one major wire run into the door, the CAN lines in the driver's door. All other wiring is already within the doors. It's all ready for us. Before we get started, I just want to briefly cover the hardware we're going to be using. For the sedan, assuming you're doing all 4, these are the part numbers for the MDX switches on a left-hand drive car. The only difference with the right-hand drive is the driver's switch layout is going to be slightly different, with the control for the driver's window obviously being on the right side. If you have a right-hand drive car, you can probably use the switch shown on screen. You'll just have to remember that your front windows are going to be swapped, so left is going to open the driver's window, right's going to open the passenger. If you've got the coupe, here are the part numbers you're going to need. As far as electrical connectors go, you will need 2 tabbed 37-pin connectors for the front and 2 14-pin connectors for the rear. The ones in the rear are going to be much easier to find. DigiKey has them, a lot of electronics distributors have them. As far as the fronts, those are specially made for Acura, so my advice would be to look for the harness on eBay as I did for the driver's window. You may get lucky and when you order your switches, they come with the wiring harnesses cut off the car and just plugged into the switch like I did for my passenger side. So if you get that, use it. Otherwise, get the harness on eBay. As far as terminals go, each connector has 2 different terminal sizes, large and small. The small ones are also very easy to find. Here's the part number on DigiKey, readily available. Here's where I got the large ones. They're made by Sumitomo, which for electrical connectors is not a very common brand in North America. The minimum order from this site at the time of filming is 25, so at least you'll have extras. As you probably saw, I have a Google Doc with part numbers for everything I used for all my splices. I will leave a link to that in the description. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to want to do is run the CAN lines into the driver's door. For those who don't know, the CAN bus is a communication network that virtually all electronics in the car use to communicate with each other. The driver's switch that we're going to be adding uses the CAN bus to determine whether the car is on, whether the doors are open, whether the headlights are on, all that fun stuff. We're going to be running our CAN lines into the driver's side footwell because I already have some CAN lines down there from when I did my rain sensor. If you don't have can lines down there, or you can't find can lines down there, I'm going to leave a link in the upper right hand corner to the rain sensor video where I run those can lines. And the other switches will just use communication with the driver's switch to determine those things. For this section, I'm going to be using a mix of clips from when I actually did this and when I did my turn signal mirrors, because it's essentially the same procedure. You're just running the wires to different places. First, we need to remove the door panel. As you saw in the last video, remove this cover, use a pry tool to remove your window switches, 2 Phillips head screws, remove and set aside in a safe, dry location. Then, get your pry tool, put it between the frame of the door and the door panel, pry out, lift the door panel off, set that aside as well. If any of these green trim pieces come off the door panel, just use your pry tool to remove them from the frame and slide them back into the door panel. With the door panel off, we need to get access to the hose that holds the wiring harnesses. To do that, first thing we need to remove is the speaker. It's held in by a single 8mm bolt on top and 2 tabs on the bottom. Remove the bolt, note that it's a pretty long bolt, then you're going to want to pull up on the speaker to remove the clips. If you haven't had it off in a while, as I didn't, it may not come off super easily. Be careful not to break the clips. As you can see, I did that here. And then this connector here, you squeeze the tabs on both sides, remove it. So now to get the door hose open, you're going to want to stick something like a flathead screwdriver or a pry tool in between the door hose rubber and the actual body panel. I'd recommend a pry tool so you don't remove any paint. You'll see there's a little notch there. There's a tab inside that notch there that you need to depress, and then pry the plastic housing out with your tool. And then you can, with your fingers or pliers, separate the rubber hose from the pegs on that plastic housing and get them all off so you can peel the tubing back. The end of this hose inside the door is much easier. It's only held on by a little grommet. Just squeeze it, push it through outside the door, it'll come out. Almost forgot. Before you push it out, just unclip the wiring harness inside the door. There's just 2 clips holding it on, just like that, and then it'll come out. And then from there, just try to straighten it out so you have an easier time getting wires through it. And I think the strategy I used here was to start pushing the wire through the top of that hose, and then pull it out through the bottom and into the door, and then it's easy from there. I pushed it through the little plastic housing you saw earlier, pulled it out into the footwell, and let it hang just like that. That seemed to work pretty well. Once again, remember you'll be pulling 2 wires through and not just 1. And once they're through, just run them along the wiring harness that's in the door already, just to make sure it clears the window. You're going to want to pretty much get this wiring harness to where the existing window switch connector is already. This is after the fact, so it goes to where the new connector is, but hopefully you get the idea. Then you're going to want to zip tie the new harness to the existing harness, put your speaker back in, put your vapor barrier back in, put your door back together, and you're done with the worst part of this job for sure. On the other side of this, in the driver's footwell, you're going to want to strip and splice your wires into whatever can wiring harness you've got down there, whether you've got one already or whether you've run it. When doing this, it's probably not a bad idea, if you can't unplug the harness you've got already, it's probably not a bad idea to disconnect your battery. I will show that now. So before you disconnect your battery, you want to wait for your automatic headlights to turn off, or wait for your automatic headlights to turn off if you've got them. If you've got manual headlights, just wait like a minute, 30 seconds for the entire system to shut off, and then just a 10mm bolt holding that on. Loosen it, pull the socket up, disconnect power. Well, once you have all that, you can go ahead and put the hose back together, and I will show you that from the turn signal mirror video. To reconnect your pegs, use the same strategy with the tool to remove the plastic housing, and then you can just use pliers, your fingers, whatever, tweezers, to slip the rubber back over the pegs. Do it for the side closest to you, that is the side facing the open door. We'll do the other side in the next part of the video. To close the hose on the other side, I found the best strategy is to take the wheel off, remove the fender liner, and access it from back there. Not as bad as you think. So all you gotta do is lift the car, jack up from the frame rail, place the jack stand, take the wheel off. If you don't know how to take the wheel off of a car, I'll leave a link in the upper right-hand corner to Chris Fix's video on how to do it. It's very detailed, as always. Then you'll see there are more of these plastic pop rivets. You're going to want to remove at least some of them, the one closer to the door. You can take all of them off. I don't think it's necessary. I think I did this with only the ones closest to the door, but there they are. Try not to break them. They're not that expensive, but I mean, why go through the trouble of putting your wheel back together, going to AutoZone, taking it off again, and just no. Anyway, once that's off, you're going to see this black cover here, and that's where our prize is. You can remove it by pulling out a grommet on the bottom, or what looks like a grommet. Pulling the plastic up. You see those two latches there. and then just pulling it straight out, and you'll have access to the hose. And once in there, you can employ the same screwdriver trick as you did on the other side. Hold the plastic housing out and use pliers or your fingers. I'd recommend pliers to put the rubber over the pegs, just like that. And now your vehicle's wiring is all set for your new window switches. So now go get some lunch, go take a break, you've definitely earned it. And next we will go ahead and make the splices. Okay, so to get started with splicing in the back doors, you're going to want to take the door panels off just as you did to put the motors in. Take note of where your wiring harness leaves the window switch pocket here. In relation to the label, it should be like right at the label. That's usually the best cut point. So first thing we want to do is we want to peel this extra tape off. Mine's been off before, obviously, but just peel that off. It's probably been in here for 7 to 10 years at this point, but let's get that off like that. And then you're going to want to simply peel this electrical tape off. I'm going to do that with 2 hands, but peel the tape off, and then we're going to want to cut this little tubing here. You don't need to take that much off, but just enough so you have some comfortable wiggle room to work in here. So now we're going to do something that's going to make me sick. We're going to go ahead and cut all these wires right here. They're all the same color. They won't be the same color in the driver's window, but we'll get to that later. That's what I would recommend, starting with the back windows and moving your way forward and ending at the driver's window. So, and this is why, because they're all different colors in the driver's window, so we can't mess that up. But I'll show you a trick I have for the driver's window when we get there. But for now, cut these, tell you what to do from there. All right, with that off, I didn't make them completely even, but that's fine. We're gonna go ahead and lay them out so they're straight, and get the harness on the car laid out so it is straight as well. Let me show you the splices we're going to be using. This is the female end that's going to go on the car. It's probably way too big for this. This is definitely overkill. You do not need one this big. It just needs to be able to support 18 gauge wire and a 10 amp load. So you're going to want to go ahead and strip. I would start on the car side. Go ahead and strip these, crimp them, and try to use this connector you cut off as a reference to try to get them in the same order. I'll show you that. Here are the associated crimp terminals. So it is not terribly tricky to crimp and strip a wire. You need a pair of wire strippers like this, a crimper like this. See how this one has that sort of V shape? So first thing we want to do is we want to strip the wire. We want to take note on our crimp terminals here. You can just wiggle this like it's a loose tooth to break one off, just like that. And you see how long this channel is? This smaller channel? That's about how much we want to strip off. So we're going to strip that much off. For reference, these are 18 gauge stranded. I hope. Yeah, it looks like it. Insert like so. Then we're going to want to take our crimper and insert the terminal into the appropriate size. In this case, this one does 18 to 20 or 22 to 24. We're doing 18, so we want 18 to 20. So we're going to put it in so the crimp terminal opens up toward the open portion of the crimper. I know it looks like it should go the other way, but it's actually, this is correct. So then what we want to do is actually, see these little protrusions on the sides of the pin there? We want to make sure we don't squeeze those, otherwise the pin will not go into the connector correctly. So we just squeeze that and simply insert like that. You hear that click? Do the rest of them just like that. That's what the end result should look like. Try to avoid having it come out like this as much as possible, just because that's gonna lead to hard connects, disconnects later, but you're gonna want to do the same thing on the piece you cut off. Here is the mating connector that's gonna go on the end like that, and we got one crimped, same procedure. Do them all. When doing this, you're obviously going to want to make sure that the same colors line up with the same colors on the car harness, so make sure you do that. Shouldn't be too hard. You can kind of use the connector's mating as reference. Here is what that should look like in the end. So we can now plug it in. It's kind of tricky with one hand, but just like that. And you see how both of these locking tabs went down. I think this is for a different type of connector. So now what I would recommend is that you plug the window switch back in and just test, make sure the window worked as it did, assuming you went this far. And then to make the actual harness for the automatic switch, I would recommend unplugging this and bringing it wherever you're going to do that, because you can actually use it. But test it, make sure it works, make sure all your connections are good. The front passenger side is even easier. You don't have to take the entire door off. There's enough slack here to take the entire thing out, so you can do that. That'll be a piece of black tape wrapped around this, and the wires are going to get really sticky, but other than that, it's totally doable. Also note that the front passenger side has 3 extra wires for the door lock button, and those won't be used in the new design. So, but if you're doing this, make sure those all work. Okay, so the last thing we need to do in the car is we need to splice the driver's side wiring harness. Now, this is also going to be trickier than the others because not only are there more wires in here and some of them are the same color, this wiring harness is actually hot all the time, not just when the car is turned on. So I am going to recommend that you disconnect the battery. I'm not going to do that. I kind of know what I'm dealing with here. I'm going to instead turn the lights off so the illumination circuit is dark, and I am going to pull the driver's window fuse. The others should remain. The others are controlled by a relay. They should remain off. They should remain off if I leave the car off. Feel free to do that as you please. If you short something, you risk creating a spark and blowing a fuse, and that wouldn't be good. So, if you're comfortable with wiring like I am, feel free. I'll show you where the window fuse is and turn the lights off, obviously. But if you're not, just disconnect the battery. It's not worth it. Driver power window is number 42 in the interior fuse box in the hybrid. If that's different in the regular, I'll let you know. Pulled that, windows are dark. So once you've got that, once your battery is disconnected or your windows are disabled, you're gonna want to remove whatever tape you've got here. And I think the best way to do this is going to be to break these window wires into groups. So I've got a group of black, yellow, green, white, and purple here. There are multiple black wires, multiple green, multiple purple. But just get a group of wires with all unique colors so you can't mess them up, and then pin those, then do another set. I would recommend starting with large and then doing small as well. Okay, so you see how I have black, green, and purple here spliced, and then there are more black, greens, and purples down there? That's what you want to do. Get all unique colors first, and then do the rest. That way, you won't mix anything up. Hour and a half later, there's what we're left with. So we got smaller wires there, bigger wires there. I accidentally cut this one a bit short, the big black one in the middle, so I'll have to fix that later. But everything works as it did, so now we can go ahead and unplug these and start building the Acura harness, yeah. Before we get any further, I just want to briefly show you what Honda's numbering convention for their connectors look like. So as you can see, these are the female connectors on the wire side. So looking at the connector oriented like this, as you can see, if there are any bigger pins, they are counted first, and then the numbering convention goes from right to left. So the lower numbers are going to be on the right side, and then they just go down each row. So I'm going to be referring to the pins by number in the next section, so that's how they're numbered. Okay, so now we're going to start building the new harness inside where it's nice and warm. Before we do that, if your driver or front passenger connector came with extra wires, as it most likely did, it wouldn't be such a bad idea to depin those wires, so remove those from the connector. So to do that, see this black tab here? You're going to want to get a small flat blade, pry up on that, just like this. Both sides, you'll hear it click. Then, this is one of the ones we don't need, and I'll show you that map on screen. Then you're going to want to note the location of this, turn the connector around, and take note of its location there. Get a thin-ass knitting needle, like the thinnest knitting needle you can find, insert it in there, and push it downward. There's a latch in there that you're basically trying to pry downward, and then it'll come out just like that. With that out, we can go ahead and reference our notes about what needs to pin to what. This is matching Civic harnesses to MDX harnesses, and the trick I have in mind, you see how I brought the Civic harness up here? On the Civic harness, we have this brown wire. Table says we need to map brown with white data, so what we're going to do is we're going to take note of which pin on the TE connector that brown goes into. So when we crimp the TE connector on the new switch with the new harness, we get the white data line, which is number 34, which is this one right here. We will crimp that and put it into the brown position in this connector, so that way we won't get lost. For reference, the smaller wires, like the white data line, are 20 AWG stranded. So light blue goes to this one here, which is just to the right of the singular ground hole shape connector, we'll say. So now we want to line up just like that and simply insert like that. You hear that click? So that is lined up. Do the rest of them just like that. Here's a better look at both harnesses with the new harness complete. So if we want to figure out what needs to go into the center pin here, we're just going to trace that on the Civic wiring harness. The center pin is red. That is referencing our table, which I will make available in the description as well. Referencing our table, that is one of the motor wires. So we need to find the corresponding motor wire on the MDX harness and put that in the center as well. So now they're both in the center, so this is what's going to plug into the car and it will be connected correctly. Another good reason to have a splice for your original window wiring harness. Also note, you need to connect your pulsar wires to something. I put them in this Molex connector here, which Google Doc has all the links for that, everything I used. It's the same procedure, just crimp, insert, and I did one on the car as well, as you've probably seen. And yeah, once you have something like this, it is ready to go in the car. Your back door connectors are going to be the same procedure, you just crimp and insert. Note that you most likely bought those blank, so before you insert the crimped terminals into the connector and make them a bit hard to get out, I found the larger ones to be pretty tricky to get out. I would recommend that you do like a dry run by connecting the terminals directly to the terminals on the switch, so you essentially have all the terminals in the right places without the connector, and then just make sure that it works as intended. Make sure the motor is moving the correct way, make sure everything's correct. Then with that, you can go ahead and put those in the car as well. Your driver's side harness is once again going to be the hardest, because once again, not only we have different wire sizes and two different connectors, we also have wires that split. So I printed, you see I got all my stuff out, I went ahead and printed a copy of the list you saw on my laptop in the last clip, I think, depending on where I put the clips. And as you can see, number 1 on the Civic needs to go to both 3 and 31 in the MDX. And then, see how many number 36 needs to go to? And 36 is this white one here. That's the one wire bus that they all use for basically everything. So yeah, that needs to get split. We're going to do a bit of soldering for that. Additionally, we have a lot more unused wires we need to remove. Apparently in the MDX, the window switch not only controls the door locks, it also controls the power seat memory buttons, and I think a lot of other stuff too, so we've got a lot of unnecessary wires. The ones that are folded down here are the ones we need, and also none of the ones we don't need are on this list, so just remove the ones you don't need. It should be the same procedure as the passenger side. My advice would be to get the necessary ones pinned and then remove the unnecessary ones, and I will show you the teeing and soldering now. Alright, so moving outside for soldering, and in fact this is way after the fact, so I'm just building this for the sake of building it. So we're going to start with the big ground wire, just because they are the hardest. Before you crimp them, before you get them into your splice, you want to solder them together so they tee off. Instead of having them so that they tee off like this, so all three, one for each window, that is not the driver's window, to this, I think the best strategy is to pigtail it. So you're going to have two here, and then we're going to be soldering another wire that splits off here. You'll see once I've got it in. So the wires that go to each window can be 18 gauge. The big one you want to use is 14 gauge. So cut that. Strip about, I would say, 1.5 centimeters of wire off the part you're going to solder. And I apologize if this is not in focus. Twist the ends together like so. You can see I've already done it here. Then you're going to want to get your 18 gauge wire, do the same thing. Then we're going to get the 18 gauge wire in the helping hands with the bigger wire. Get them so that the copper is about, see how it's not quite even there? We want to get it so that it is. So just like that. Get your big one. I can't find my heat shrink, but get your heat shrink on the big one that is going to be splitting, so to speak. Then, instead of tightening two and then tightening the third around it, best to try to grab all three and try to twist them together all at once. Maybe easier said than done. Do this, you're gonna wanna practice this a bit before you actually do it. And sometimes you just have to, especially when you're dealing with different sizes. So get that, make sure no strands break off. Then, you're going to want to get, you cannot use a circuit board soldering iron for this, you have to use a big one. So, squeeze this to turn the iron on, you see how the LEDs are on? And then my hands get kind of shaky, so if you can, try to brace it against your ground or something. And then this is gonna take a hot minute to heat up, so basically you're just gonna want to wait for this to warm up, wait till, if you see the insulation melting, we'll try to mitigate that, but move it a bit closer to the center, maybe, your heat. This is a smoky process, so do it outside. Try not to braid this in too much. You just wanna get your solder. You want the solder to flow through the braids of the wire that are twisted together. Oh yeah. And you wanna apply your solder not to your iron tip like I'm doing here. Instead, you wanna get it on the wire itself. And the bigger wires take longer to heat up so that they melt. Yeah, you see that bubbling there? That is good. And take the iron off as it's still hot. Probably not the greatest joint, but hopefully you get the idea. Then just get your heat shrink over like that, fire your heat gun like we did in video 2. Strip, crimp, and you're ready to add this to the splice. And now going back to when I actually did this, once you've got your terminals crimped on, you'll just insert them into the splice as normal. As you can see, I did not use the pigtail here, I just teed them all off and hoped for the best. Not the best idea, so I would recommend using the pigtails. If you're getting a lot of cold solder joints while you're doing this, or you're worried about getting cold solder joints, which cold solder joints do not conduct as well, nor do they hold the wires together as well, you can ask a shop if they'll do this. They'll probably charge a small fee for it, and you may have to ask specifically to use lead-free solder, but if you're worried, that is an option. The data lines are going to be very similar to the teed-off ground. Of course, you can make them as thin as your splice will allow because they don't have to carry a lot of power. And if you've already got the driver's wire, that's 20 gauge, so yeah. You can tee that off, you can pigtail it, whatever. The MDX uses separate power lines for the window motor and the window switch in the driver's door, so you're going to need to tee those off from the singular power in the Civic driver's window. You're also going to need to tee off an extra ground. Additionally, the encoder for the driver's door needs to be spliced into that ground. All of this information is on the table. Once again, a link to that will be in the description. So, now with all of the harnesses built, we are ready to do the easiest part of this mod, and that is physically swapping the switches in the car with the new switches and harnesses. I would say swap the driver's switch first. The driver's switch is sort of the parent of all the other switches in both the Civic and the MDX. The MDX switches will not work with the Civic driver's switch, and the Civic switches will not work with the MDX driver's switch. So for the driver and front passenger, they're both held in exactly the same way. Just 4 Phillips head screws, here, 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 here. I've already taken those off. And then you just lift that out, and driver and front passenger are completely interchangeable between the Civic and MDX. So there's the Civic switch, here's the MDX switch. You kind of have to finagle this a little bit, but you see the holes line up for both the switch itself and the lock-on-lock switch, which won't work yet once we get this in the car, but we'll have a video on that eventually. So you're basically going to want to, this is kind of tricky the first time you do it, but sort of get the window switch started and move, and you'll see that tab. Just move it up like that, and that's done, and then you can just put the 4 Phillips head screws back exactly where they were in the Civic switch. And then these 2 new splice connectors we put in make everything plug and play, so we can just plug the new switch in, snap it in as you would with the Civic switch. Yeah, you now have an automatic window switch on your passenger door. Yay. Driver's switch is the same, it's just a bit more crowded, so you'll have to move the wires around to get it seated. To mount the back window switches in the switch panel, I also made a little pigtail for the encoder or pulsar. We need to do a little bit of surgery. These screw holes are not the same as these screw holes. So first thing we want to do is we want to see these 3 locator pins down here. We need to cut those off. So get something like a wire snipper or even one of those vertical strippers that I'll put a picture of here. I don't know the name for it. Cut those off and then I'll show you what to do. Then I employed a bit of a sketchy solution here. I secured the back of the switch with aluminum tape. Good idea? It seems to be, no, it's not even holding that well. But I'm gonna try to make a more permanent bracket for this, so hopefully we won't have to have this for long. And then as you can see, we have a lighted switch. We have automatic in both directions. So first thing you're going to want to do once you get everything installed is make sure that the driver switch responds to things like the car turning on or off, the headlights, if I can get the switch here. Notice the illumination on the switch turns off when I turn the headlights off. You want to make sure that still works. Obviously make sure your CAN connections are intact. Then, it's well after the fact here, so everything works, but then make sure that your window moves up and down automatically as it should. It may stop up midway, that's fine, we'll fix that in a few minutes, but if you have a situation where you have to press and hold, like it's in manual mode, like that, well, there's a couple things you might need to check. First, make sure the direction is correct. I'll show you what that looks like. So if you get this working and then you get something like this, where it doesn't move when you hit it down, but when you hit it up, it goes down with no automatic function, well, you're gonna need to switch your window wires, in that case, blue and yellow. Do not switch them on the car, switch them on the window switch. Once you've fixed your direction, you're gonna want to perform the reset procedure that I will describe in the next section. If that does not fix the issue, then you very likely have your 2 pulsar pins reversed. So one pulse is supposed to be on the other is supposed to be on the other. So first thing I would try is reverse those pulsar pins, do the procedure again, and confirm that you have auto up down. If that fixes it, you're good to go. Do that for the other 3 windows as well. Other possible scenarios you could encounter if you've wired something wrong include, say when you have the car on position 2, the driver's switch responds to the headlights, it responds to the car being on, but none of the other switches do. Like they all act like the car is off, they all act like if you've hit the window switch, nothing happens. If that's the case, and your window lock is off, obviously, the first thing I would recommend checking would be to see if you've accidentally connected a data line to one of the power lines in the driver's splice, because none of the power lines in the driver's splice, besides the one for the driver's switch, need to connect to the new driver's wiring harness. But a lot of them in the Civic wiring harness are the same color as our new data lines. So if you find that, get a multimeter, check for 12 volts at all of the data lines. If you see a solid 12 volt on your data line, then you know it's that. Check each connection, make sure one of the data pins is not plugged into a power pin. Another scenario you could encounter as a result of mixing up wire colors is if the driver switch works, most of the switches work, but one does not work. Well, if you plugged one of those unused power pins into a ground pin, something that became a ground pin, you most likely blew the fuse under your dash. You'll need to replace it. So once again, get your multimeter, be doubly sure that everything is correct. And obviously check for 12 volts once you have replaced the fuse. So to calibrate your new window motors, and I would probably recommend doing this on all of them, the service manual says to do it whenever you've replaced a motor, switch, regulator, and well, we kind of did all those things. So this is the procedure. It does require you to be at the door that you're trying to calibrate, and the power switch or key must be accessible. So I'm gonna kind of do a dry run here because I know I'm not going to be able to demonstrate this while holding a camera too well, but the first thing you want to do is you want to turn your car on to position 2. Yes, my hood is open right now, but for a different reason. You do not need to have the hood open for this. You're going to want to turn the car on, roll the window that you want to program all the way down, just like that. Then you're going to want to open the door, turn the car off, press the button again, turn the car back on, and release it. And do the press and release 3 more times, so a total of 4. And then once that's done, you should have something similar to your window being if you try to press the automatic switch, the window moves up or down in manual mode. So then from there, you want to roll the window all the way down and then all the way up. And I will try to show you that process now. Also note that if you're doing this on the front passenger side window, so the way that the Acura MDX switches work is they're designed to have constant power. The power to the window switches is not switched like it is in the Civic. So if you see if I turn the car off, you notice the light's turned off. So, well, the light on this switch turned off, so the switch no longer has power. The switch needs to have constant power during this process. So what I would recommend is that you get a piece of wire and you bypass your window motor relay. And I think I got a better picture of that I'll put up on screen, but bypass the window motor relay. You only need to do that for the front passenger door. The back doors do not disable the system when they're open, and the driver's door always has power, so yeah. Okay, so I've got a tripod in my lap here, and I've got the camera on it, so hopefully you guys can see this. We're gonna turn the car on, lower the window all the way. And you have to be, you can't do any of the other windows from the driver's seat, you have to be at the actual door. So now we're gonna open the door, turn the car off, press the button, turn the car back on, release, turn the car off, press the button again. 3, I think this is 3. Then like that. And you see we're off here, so first thing we need to do is we need to move the window down all the way. Hold that for at least 2 seconds. Then move it up, hold that for at least 2 seconds. So now we should have full functionality. And if it does that at all, it wasn't doing that originally, but it's doing it now. If it does that, turn the car off, then back on again, and it should stop. And that's pretty much it. Your Civic is now probably one of the few in the world that has automatic windows on all 4 doors. It's not, by any stretch of the imagination, an easy modification to make to the car, but if you live in a warmer climate like I do, I would say it is well worth it. And obviously if you like driving with the windows down as much as I do. But yeah, you also have lighted window switches on all 4 doors, so definitely take a break, enjoy it. You just installed something that a lot of people have said was impossible. Like, I know that there's mention of people trying this on the forums, but I have not seen anyone actually succeed. Oh, come on, really? As we approach Mopac here, roll up the windows with one hand, turn the AC on with another. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to leave me a comment, shoot me a direct message, shoot me an email, aidencivicminded@gmail.com. And I will close with have fun, drive safe, and I will see you in the next one. Here's a little teaser frame for the next one. This is gonna hopefully be a much easier one than this one. I'm actually looking forward to it. It's gonna be kind of relaxing. Hopefully it'll address a problem that I think a lot of people have complained about in the 14, 15 models. So that's what I'm